Hey there, this is Carol Matz, and this is the teaching tips video for one of my studio packs, and this is Classics Pack 1, written for the intermediate levels. Now this video and the other materials in the PDF are studio licensed, which is great. That means you're allowed to share the materials with any of your own piano students in any way that you'd like. You can print, you can email, etc. Now in this video, I'm going to be referring both to the score itself as well as the student exploration pages, which are located right before each piece. So you might want to have those materials in front of you for reference. Now before we get going, just a quick reminder that you're going to want to download all of the MP3 backing tracks and model performances, and these are found on page 6 of the PDF. Also, I think you're going to love the next several pages of multimedia student resources, and this includes videos and sound files, maps, images, all sorts of things that relate to the piece that the student is learning, a little bit of music history, information about the composers, and so forth. Now, I assembled all these resources in one place right here in these pages to make it easy for students to have a completely immersive, fun, and interactive experience while they're learning their new piece. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to cover one piece at a time. And if you want to skip directly to any particular piece, simply go back to the page of the PDF that you were on and just click on the timestamp for that piece. The timestamp is where it says the minutes and seconds. And you just click on that and you'll be sent directly to that portion of the video. Okay, here's Spring from the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. I love this piece and I love teaching it. Definitely a student and parent favorite in my studio. Now Spring is a fun piece. It's filled with contrasts. You can see contrasting legato versus staccato touches, and there are also a lot of contrasts in dynamics. Now this next slide here, it shows the top part of the student exploration page for Spring, and this is found right before the first page of the piece itself. Now the student exploration pages have different types of activities that are designed to help the student explore the piece thoroughly. That's going to help with more effective practice and performance. There are warm-ups, discovery and listening activities, and even opportunities for students to do a little bit of creating on their own, which I really like them to do. Now the first part of the student exploration page has warm-up exercises that work on articulation and shaped phrases. So you can see here, play each warm-up below slowly before building up speed. Now this first warm-up, and this is taken from the piece, this is going to be starting on an upbeat. So you want to make sure your students are counting that 1, 2, 3, and then coming in on 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it takes that pattern and moves up the keyboard. Okay, so the idea here is to get the student to feel the weight of the thumb, digging into the keys and then lifting and rising each time. Okay, now the second warm-up is based on the second half of that melodic figure. Here I put it in C because I also want the students to do it in sequence, building one step above each time. So they're going to shape that phrase. Now staccato, staccato. So now they can continue this up the keyboard. Kids who are going to go do that all the way, and it's going to be annoying, and they're going to get it, so that's okay. All right, next up. Now, this is also from the student exploration page, and this is a section, discovery section, and you can see that this says circle the dynamics on the first page of the piece and compare the music at the beginning at forte with the music at piano. And do you notice anything? And we'll look in a second. And then the second discover says on the second page of the piece, put a check over all the measures with this rhythm pattern. You can see it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, okay? So let's go ahead and see what that looks like in the piece itself. So here's where we have the same exact music. You can see where the arrows are pointing. Same exact music at forte, and then again later at measure 6, it's the same music at the softer dynamic of piano. And then you can also see that this is where we have the phrases from our warm-ups. It appears constantly, so we want to have students really get that under their fingers. And now here's the second page of music, where the student finds recurring rhythms and puts a check mark. Now, I often ask students to look for repeating rhythm patterns in their music. I think it helps them to quickly learn new sections of music that have the same rhythm, even if it's different notes. And that's when you would take a rhythm and isolate it and clap it and tap it and have the student locate each occurrence. And that's gonna turn what might be a rough spot actually into a confident spot in the piece. So always going through, finding out where that rhythm pattern is. And you'll see it actually occurs twice. You're gonna have some kid point this out to you. It actually occurs at, just FYI, it measures 18 and again it measures 25, but it doesn't have the same articulation. So that could even be a bonus question that you could do. And finally, here's the last section from the student exploration page. This time it's a listening activity involving parallel motion. Now, the music in this example is taken from the B section of the piece, from measures 30 and 31. So says slowly, play hands separately, then together. Notice how the notes from the two hands move in the same direction at all times. This is called parallel motion. So you can see the right hand stepping up, down, down. Okay, I'm obviously following those little arrows. Goes up, down, down. Okay, so the left hand, you can see it has the same color arrows. It's doing the same exact thing. Right hand. Played together, you've got parallel motion. Actually, these are tenths apart, from a C to the E, an octave above. So. And that will actually now become a confident measure instead of a measure that has to be approached with any kind of trepidation. So they'll really have that under their hands. Okay, in the Hall of the Mountain King by Grieg. I think everybody knows and loves this piece. It's the one that goes like this. So you see that I've got those major thirds. That's the main theme. It's the famous theme. It makes it sound a little maybe sinister, or makes it like a Halloween recital piece. But it's really a study in playing staccatos and also in building dynamics throughout the piece. So this is a very easily recognizable melody, and you can see that it's got the major third, C to E, and then it goes down a half step to B and D sharp, and then the student's fingers flip on a diagonal so that the pointer finger goes on the B flat. That's a good exercise to have students do. They think it's fun. So that's the idea. Here's 5 and 3 on the first of the major thirds, 4 and 2, and then 4 and 2. And that's the famous sound of the Grieg piece in the Hall of the Mountain King. So now we'll take a look at the first page of music, and you can see I've marked the occurrences of those chromatic major thirds in measures 1 and 2. Now notice that the right hand actually starts in bass clef, And then it changes to treble clef at measure 9, where you can see there's a red arrow. And I always like to point out to my students that the new clef symbol is always written before the new measure. It's a little counterintuitive, but it's kind of like a warning sign. It's always written right before the measure that it applies to. Now you also might want to point out to your students that the left hand in this piece has got that 8VA but with a dashed line that extends the 8VA all the way across the first 4 measures. Now, because the 8VA is written below the left hand, it actually means that you have the student play those notes 1 octave lower. When 8VA is above the note, physically written above the note, then you would play it an octave above. But there are usages to have the 8VA in the left hand, which means to play an octave below. So that's that. Should be pianissimo at first. The little mountain king or troll or whatever, that's his sound. Okay, now what's really interesting here is that I decided to put some tenuto marks, and composers and arrangers will use these for a variety of reasons. In this instance, I mean, it's to emphasize the note, but in this instance, I'm going to start playing at measure 3. Staccato, and then you've got that tenuto mark. So in this context, it really means this note is not staccato. They don't have to slam it as if it were an accented note, but it's a slight emphasis, and this way you'll hear dot, 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 long up. Okay, so that's an important figure that happens over and over. All right, now here's the second page of music, and you can see again up here the theme written up there in the right hand. And now while the previous page had dynamics that started on pianissimo and built up, you'll see now here at measure 13, we're at mezzo forte, and it's still building. You can see there's crescendo measure 16, forte measure 17, fortissimo. I mean, you really want to have the student create that dynamic, I don't want to say dynamic curve, because it's really pretty much a straight up from pianissimo to fortissimo all the way at the end. And then you'll also see at measure 17 that the right hand plays an octave higher, because this time the 8VA is written above the notes. Okay, now the next slide, these are the warm-ups from the student exploration page. And you can see here that I'm really focusing on getting the students to feel those chromatic major thirds. So it's a major third. Well, the first one here is a minor third. Then from the piece, C to E, then moving down a half step. So the students will practice slowly before increasing the tempo. So this is blocking what would otherwise be broken notes. It's a little harder to do, a little less secure than it is to do. And then another exercise to keep the whole thing staccato, number 2 here, the warm-up. This way they're having to play them a little quicker, closer together with less of a pause in between. And then the warm-ups 3 and 4 have the student reinforce playing nice crisp staccatos in the left hand, these fifths, and they move in parallel motion. So this is a good drill for that, both numbers 3 and 4. And finally, wait, not finally, but in addition. Okay, so this is the Discover section, and this has some of the things I just pointed out. Measures 1 through 20. Circle all the dynamics. We want the student to see how that piece builds in intensity from pianissimo all the way up to fortissimo. At measure 1, we talked about the right hand plays the melody in bass clef. Where does the right hand change to treble clef? Draw an arrow like we did. And then at measure 1, notice the 8VA is below the left hand. Can you find another 8VA, etc. Now, this is what I got prematurely excited about. The bonus activity of the student explorations. So after the student learns the piece, they're going to compose basically their own piece that's based on musical ideas from In the Hall, the Mountain King. I'm actually in this slide I was only able to show two of the lines of music. There is a third line, but just to get the idea of what the students are doing here, they write out the left-hand part. They're cued some notes, and they write the left-hand part, and they add dynamics where they're told to copy left-hand measures 1 and 2, add dynamic, etc. Then what they're going to do is choose melody notes from the 5 finger patterns that are given over there in the light purple to complete that right-hand part. And then what I did is I had the small notes in measures 2 through 4 up above the staff. That shows the rhythm that the student should use for their right-hand melody. So they choose notes from, this is a D minor 5 finger pattern, and then they would write any notes D, E, F, G, A in quarter notes. They choose the notes, write them on the staff, and they would continue through that way. And when they're done, they have an entire piece. They can play their piece, and they can give it a title and write it in the little blank there. And a super fun activity if you want to try that with your students. Okay, here's Andaluza by Granados. This is from his 12 Spanish dances. Andaluza is an area in southern Spain, and that's where the town of Seville is. That's home to flamenco music with the guitars and castanets and all those fiery driving rhythms, and some of those are definitely on display in this piece. I do have a personal attachment to this piece because, as many of you know, my mom is a terrific pianist, and I grew up playing underneath her baby grand piano and listening to all these amazing pieces, and this was in her repertoire. She used to play it all the time, and it was definitely one of my favorites when I was a little kid, all the vivid imagery, and I love the sound of this. So let's take a look at the top of the student exploration page, and these are warm-ups for the students to tap and then play the rhythm of the opening measures. So tap this rhythm on your lap, hands together, and always while counting aloud. So the student taps in 3/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and then they transition to being able to play easily the music that is at the beginning measures, which is in D minor. Okay, now, next on the student exploration page, there is a section called Create, and here the student's going to get to experiment with some parts of the music. And in this activity, they'll play those opening measures of Andaluza, but now transposed to A minor, and then it is indicated to play the same pattern, but this time down a step, and then keep moving the pattern down the keyboard by steps. And it says go as far as you'd like. There are going to be some students who will do all the way. You can do 2, whatever the student wants to do. So it's just kind of fun to get that groove or that riff down under the student's hands, and that rhythm, that syncopation of the right hand on the upbeats, 1 and 2 and 3 and. So first tap and then play. And now the last section here on the student exploration page is a listening activity. And so it says play the first line of the piece. Do you hear major or minor? We've established we hear minor. It's in a minor key. Now it asks the student to play from measure 28th and keep going until you hear the switch from major to minor, and then the student is asked to write major above that measure, and then finally locate where the piece returns to minor. Remember that each piece in this multimedia package has a model recording of the piece played on piano. So you might want to ask your students to play the recording while following along with the score. And this way they can listen to things such as shifts between major and minor, listen for dynamics, expression, and other things. So remember that those are there for you as a resource as well. So, Eine Kleine Nachtmusik, the first movement theme by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. You might recognize this picture on the slide. It's actually the actor Tom Hulce in his role as Mozart from the movie Amadeus, which if you haven't seen, you definitely need to see it. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is towards the beginning. It has an old man named Salieri. He was a rival composer of Mozart. He was super jealous of Mozart because he was able to recognize Mozart's absolute genius and knew he couldn't really measure up. So in this scene, the old man Salieri is talking to a young priest, and he's trying to get him to recognize one of his famous compositions. And he plays little bits and pieces of each little song that he'd written that was played all over Vienna, and the priest is kind of embarrassed that he doesn't really recognize them. And then the old man is like, wait, I know one. And he goes. And then the priest is like, bum, ba bum, ba 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 bum, and starts singing the whole thing all the way through. And he's like, oh, I know that song. That's charming. I didn't know you wrote that. And the old man's like, I didn't. That was Mozart. So even his rival knew that Mozart had a genius that really couldn't be explained. Did you ever have that melody that you cannot get out of your head? You can't stop humming it, and you're folding the laundry, and you wish it would stop? Those things that are infectious, that super catchy, hooky kind of a way of writing music that really grabs the listener's attention. And Mozart had that skill down. So here's that famous melody right here in the opening measures. We just looked at that. And what I'd like to do here is kind of demystify this beginning. It's, requires a little practice with the fingering, but what you want students to realize is that they're outlining chords. These are just dum, G, B, D, D, G, B, D. So that is a G, with the D on the bottom is a G major second inversion. Then they have C, A, F sharp, A, D. So that's a D7, D dominant 7. Okay, so those are the opening chords. Really encourage teachers to get into breaking down the chords of their pieces so the students start to see chord progressions and music theory in action. And it also really helps for memorization. It helps a student remember, oh, now I'm moving to that D7 chord. So it gives things a little bit more cohesion. Okay, now from measure 5, let me play. This is where it goes. What I wanted to focus on right there is from the arrow right there at measure 9. So you see that we've got a couple of measures with 16th note figures. So let's take a look at how we're going to work on those with the student on the student exploration page. So clap the rhythm to start off. We've got these warm-ups. Clap the rhythm while counting out loud from measures 9 to 10 of the piece. So it's 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a whatever way that you like to have your students clap. Then I also thought it would be fun, and it is a very good skill to vocalize, to have a little saying, cherries, watermelon, cherries, watermelon. So the student can cherries, watermelon, cherries, watermelon. For Harry Styles fans, sugar, watermelon, sugar, watermelon. The student can write in if they come up with a little cute idea, some kind of mnemonic to really get that 16th note figure down. And then I even had a little challenge here. Try using Mozart's name. So it's Wolfgang Amadeus, Wolfgang Amadeus. A little lesson in trying to pronounce his name. And then the second warm-up, play the music, and this is based on measure 16 of the piece. And in this pattern of thirds, your hand's going to move down on beat 3 of each measure. So you ask the student to play this and continue going down the keyboards as long as they'd like, so they can get the feel of that hand shifting on beat 3. So it's shift, and then the student can take this as long as they'd like to down the keyboard, etc. Okay, now this music is from the second page of the arrangement. It's the bottom 3 lines, and you can see that red arrow pointing at measure 18. So here's measure 18. We'll lead in. Okay, so what's interesting about that is we can take that little piece of music, that da 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 dum bum 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 bum, just that little section, and have students base a composition just around that fragment. So here we're going to have this bonus activity after the student learns the piece. They're going to choose melody notes from up here, D, E, F sharp, G, or A. And then you'll see that I've given small notes above the right hand to show the student the rhythm that they're going to use for the melody notes that they choose. And then they'll play it through, and they can even give their piece a title and write it in up there and wow their families. Now here's Debussy's Cakewalk. This is another piano piece that really reminds me of my mom, amazing pianist who's always playing the masterworks of so many composers when we were growing up. My sister and I actually had a silly dance to this piece. We would bounce up and down to the oompa, oompa, that left hand ragtime pattern. This is a really wonderfully syncopated and lively, fun piece, very fun to play. One note I would like to make is that you'll see I chose not to use the piece's original title, Gollywog's Cakewalk, which refers to an overtly racist character in blackface, like in a minstrel show. However, I think it's really important to not forget history, not whitewash things, and therefore I included some really interesting historical information on this for you and your students to read about, and that can be found on the multimedia page for this piece. Okay, now let's take a look at the student exploration piece. This is the top of the page where we have some warm-up so the student can really feel those syncopated rhythms, and also to prepare the student for some left-hand crossovers. So let's see what we've got in warm-up number 1. Tap the right hand while counting out loud. Then add the left hand and tap hands together slowly while counting. They're going to want to repeat that activity till it feels easy, so tapping on their laps. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you caught that I messed up and played an extra note, didn't you? Okay, so now the student is seeing that 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and really point out that and 2. It's the note that comes in on a that is accented on a beat you don't expect it to be, that creates the syncopation. So a syncopation is an accent where one might not expect one to be. Okay, so we expect the accents on 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so when you have an accent on the and, it's not as expected. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4. So that's really what we're getting the student to feel, that accent on the upbeat of the and of 1. So then, as far as getting the part of the song where the student crosses over, they're going to tap this same example, except this time all the notes that have a little asterisk, they're going to have their left hand cross over their right hand. So tapping will look like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's a really good way to really get that feeling of the piece, because that is the characteristic syncopated rhythm of the entire piece. And now also on the student exploration page we have a create activity. So we just went over the syncopated rhythm. Now the student's going to create some short improvisations using that rhythm. So really good reinforcement. 1 and 2 and 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Okay, so now the student's going to take that rhythm, and it's written out for them here. They don't have to write this out. This is just to play on the piano. They're going to choose any major or minor 5-finger pattern, and then they'll play that pattern in octave jumps, moving either up the keyboard or down the keyboard. So the student has two choices. They can choose a major or a minor 5-finger pattern, any one really, and then they're going to play that pattern moving up or down the keyboard in octaves. So the first example that I have written out here is on the A minor 5-finger pattern, going up the keyboard using the syncopation. So and they could do another pattern, moving down, moving up. This is all really just to kind of become immersed in fluid in playing the syncopation. Now the second create activity is to do a short improvisation with any major or minor triad, any 3-note chord. So the student's going to play a broken triad in octave jumps, the way that it's written here, moving up, either up or down the keyboard again. So they choose major or minor and whether they want to move up or down. So I'm going to choose C major triad, moving down the keyboard. So we start here. The triad is broken. 1, 3, 5, 3, 1. Like that. So, oops, I forgot to start up an octave. And there are endless combinations the student can use. They can play hands together and really basically just have fun and be creative with some of these musical ideas from Debussy's Cakewalk.